Tonight, I'll make you mine. 4 words whispered in the shadows of a charity gala. 4 words that would shatter the carefully constructed walls of 2 people who had forgotten how to be vulnerable. Daniel Rowe, a single father who measured his worth in bedtime stories and scraped knees, never expected to become the obsession of Isabella Grant, a billionaire heiress who controlled empires but couldn't control her own heart. What begins as a moment of reckless confession becomes a collision between duty and desire, between the life you're expected to live and the one you're terrified to want. This is a story about power that doesn't protect you, choices that cost everything, and love that refuses to be possessed. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're ready for a story about 2 people learning that real love isn't about conquest, it's about courage, hit that like button and let's begin. The Grandview Hotel ballroom glittered like a constellation brought to earth, crystal chandeliers casting prisms across marble floors, champagne flutes catching light like liquid gold, and 500 of the city's elite dressed in their most expensive armor. The annual Heritage Foundation Gala was the kind of event where fortunes were pledged between appetizers and political alliances were sealed over dessert, where every smile was calculated and every conversation had a price tag. Daniel Rowe stood near the coat check, his rented tuxedo fitting well enough to pass inspection, but not well enough to convince anyone he belonged. He'd been here for exactly 90 minutes, long enough to fulfill his obligation to the firm, long enough to shake the right hands and make the appropriate small talk, and exactly long enough to feel the weight of his daughter's absence like a stone in his chest. He checked his watch, 9:47 p.m. Emma would be asleep by now, her babysitter probably stretched out on the couch watching television with the volume low. She'd asked him that morning if he had to go, her small fingers tangled in his tie as he'd knelt down to her level. "Just for a little while, sweetheart," he'd promised, "and when I get home, I'll check on you, even if you're already dreaming." "Promise?" she'd whispered, her 7-year-old eyes searching his face with the kind of intensity that still surprised him. "Promise." Daniel pulled his coat claim ticket from his pocket, ready to make good on that promise, when a voice stopped him cold. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Rowe?" He turned to find Marcus Chen, one of the senior partners at Whitmore and Associates, approaching with a champagne flute in one hand and a knowing smile that Daniel had learned to dread. "My daughter," Daniel said simply, because it was always the truth and the only explanation he needed to give. Marcus's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. A calculation. A reassessment. "Of course. Family first, that's admirable." He paused, swirling his champagne. "Though I should mention, Isabella Grant noticed you earlier, asked who you were." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Everyone in this room knew who Isabella Grant was, the heiress to the Grant real estate empire, a woman whose family owned half the skyline and influenced the other half. At 29, she'd already expanded her family's holdings into 3 new markets, negotiated deals that made seasoned executives nervous, and maintained a public image so polished it could cut glass. Daniel had seen her earlier, holding court near the silent auction, surrounded by a constellation of admirers who orbited her like she was the sun. She'd been wearing something black and elegant that probably cost more than his car. Her dark hair swept up in a way that seemed both effortless and impossible. And she'd been laughing at something someone said, a laugh that looked perfect and sounded empty. "I'm sure she asks about lots of people," Daniel said, keeping his voice neutral. "Not like this." Marcus leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Victor Hale practically bristled when she asked. "You know how protective he is of the Grant family interests." Daniel did know. Victor Hale was Isabella's family's executive enforcer, the man who made problems disappear and deals happen, who wielded power like a scalpel and never hesitated to cut. He was also, according to office gossip, deeply invested in maintaining Isabella's engagement to Senator James Whitmore's son, a merger of political influence and real estate power that had been in the works since both parties were children. "I should go," Daniel said, moving toward the coat check. "Daniel!" Marcus's voice carried a warning now, the kind of tone that suggested friendly advice backed by professional consequences. "Whatever this is, whatever she noticed, be careful. People like Isabella Grant don't just notice people like us. And when they do, it's rarely simple. Daniel met his eyes. There's nothing to be careful about. I'm going home to my daughter. He collected his coat and walked toward the exit, weaving through clusters of conversation, past ice sculptures melting slowly under warm lights, past servers carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than some people made in an hour. The ballroom doors were 20 feet away, then 15, then 10. Then he heard it. A voice, low and close, speaking words that seemed to materialize out of the air itself. "Tonight, I'll make you mine." Daniel froze. The words weren't loud. They were barely more than a whisper, spoken just behind his left shoulder with a breathless quality that suggested they'd escaped without permission. He turned slowly, already knowing who he'd find but needing to confirm the impossible. Isabella Grant stood 3 feet away, partially hidden in the shadow of a marble column, her perfect composure fractured just enough for him to see the shock in her own eyes. She looked at him the way someone might look at words they'd written in a dream, waking to find them carved into stone, horrified and transfixed by her own revelation. For a moment, neither of them moved. The gala continued around them, conversations flowing like water around rocks. But in that small pocket of space, time seemed to crystallize into something sharp and fragile. Daniel's first instinct was to respond, but the words that came to mind, "Excuse me?" or "I think you're mistaken," or even "I'm not interested," all felt inadequate, too small for the weight of what had just happened. Because what had just happened wasn't a proposition or even a confession. It was something rawer, more desperate. It was the sound of perfect control shattering. Isabella recovered first, her mask sliding back into place with practiced efficiency, though her hands betrayed her, one pressed against the column as if she needed it for balance, the other curled into a fist at her side. "I apologize," she said, and her voice was different now, cooler, more measured. That was inappropriate. Daniel should have agreed, should have accepted the apology and walked away, should have done exactly what he'd been planning to do since the moment he'd arrived, leave this gilded cage and return to the only thing that mattered. Instead, he heard himself say, "Why?" The question seemed to surprise them both. Isabella's composure wavered again. "Why did I say it, or why am I apologizing?" "Either. Both." Daniel shifted his coat to his other arm, suddenly aware that they were still standing in a public space, that someone could walk by at any moment, that this conversation was already several steps past professional boundaries. "You don't seem like someone who says things without meaning them." A sound escaped her throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "I used to think that too." She looked away toward the ballroom where the gala continued in full bloom, where her world waited with all its expectations and obligations. When she looked back, something in her expression had shifted, softened just enough to seem human. "I've been watching you all night," she admitted, and the honesty in her voice was almost painful. "Watching you check your watch, watching you stand at the edges of conversations, watching you not belong here. And then I saw you heading for the exit, and I just—" She stopped, shook her head. "I don't know what I was thinking." "You were thinking you wanted something," Daniel said quietly, "and you're used to taking what you want." He meant it as an observation, not an accusation, but Isabella flinched anyway. "Is that what you think? That I'm some spoiled heiress who collects people like accessories?" Her voice had an edge now, defense wrapped in designer clothing. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Daniel acknowledged. "I don't. Just like you don't know anything about me, except that I don't belong at parties like this, and I leave early for my daughter." The mention of Emma seemed to pierce whatever armor Isabella had rebuilt. Her expression shifted again, and Daniel saw something he didn't expect, longing, raw and unguarded, before she could hide it. "Your daughter," Isabella repeated softly. "How old is she?" 7. "And her mother?" "Gone." Daniel's voice was flat, not from lack of feeling, but from having learned to compress all that feeling into a single word. 3 years now. Car accident." "I'm sorry." And she meant it. He could hear it in the way her voice gentled, in the way she looked at him like he was suddenly real instead of just interesting. "Thank you." Daniel glanced at his watch again, 9:53 p.m. "I really do need to go." "Of course." Isabella straightened, pulling herself back together with visible effort. "I won't keep you. I shouldn't have. She stopped, seemed to reconsider. Actually, no, I'm not going to apologize again for speaking the truth, even if it was the wrong truth at the wrong time. But I will let you go. Daniel nodded, turned toward the exit, made it 3 steps before her voice stopped him again. Mr. Rowe? He looked back. Isabella stood in the shadow of the column, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She was just standing there, letting him see whatever was written on her face. Confusion, curiosity, something that might have been hunger or might have been fear. When you check on your daughter tonight, she said, I hope she's dreaming something beautiful. The kindness in those words, the genuine warmth, was somehow more unsettling than the whispered confession had been, because the confession could be dismissed as impulse, as champagne and dim lighting and the strange gravity that sometimes pulled strangers together in crowded rooms. But this quiet wish for his daughter's dreams, was real. Thank you, Daniel said again, and this time he meant it for more than condolences. Then he walked out into the November night, leaving Isabella Grant standing alone in the shadows of her own perfect life, and drove home to the only person who'd ever made him feel like he belonged anywhere. Emma was asleep when he got home, curled on her side with one arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. Daniel stood in her doorway for a long moment, just watching the rise and fall of her breathing, letting the sight of her smooth away the strange edges of the evening. Mrs. Patterson, the babysitter, was gathering her things when he came back downstairs. She went down easy tonight, the older woman reported, pulling on her coat. Asked me to tell you she found a ladybug in the garden today. Wanted to make sure I mentioned it was red with exactly 7 spots. Daniel smiled despite himself. That sounds important. Everything's important when you're 7. Mrs. Patterson paused at the door, studying him with the kind of knowing look that came from raising 4 children of her own. How was your fancy party? Expensive, Daniel said, and unnecessary. But you had to go. But I had to go. He walked her to her car, waited until she pulled out of the driveway, then went back inside to the quiet house that had been his sanctuary and his prison for 3 years. The kitchen still had Emma's breakfast dishes in the sink. He'd meant to wash them before leaving, but had run out of time. He washed them now, the warm water and simple task giving his hands something to do while his mind tried to process what had happened at the gala. Tonight, I'll make you mine. 4 words that kept replaying in his head like a song he couldn't shake. Not because they were tempting, though he'd be lying if he said Isabella Grant wasn't beautiful, but because they were so nakedly honest. In a room full of people performing their roles, wearing their masks, executing their carefully rehearsed lines, she'd said something true. And then she'd looked horrified by her own truth. Daniel dried his hands and moved to the living room, sinking into the couch that sagged slightly in the middle, that Emma had spilled juice on twice and that he kept meaning to replace. Through the window, he could see the lights of the city glowing against the November sky. Somewhere in that landscape of glass and steel, Isabella Grant was probably back in her world, surrounded by people who expected her to be perfect. What must that be like? To have everything, money, power, beauty, influence, and still whisper desperate confessions to strangers in the shadows. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen. Hope you got home safe. Interesting night. We should talk Monday. Daniel deleted it without responding. Whatever Marcus wanted to talk about could wait. Everything could wait except the promises he'd made to a 7-year-old girl who counted ladybug spots and trusted him to come home. He climbed the stairs, checked on Emma one more time. She'd shifted in her sleep, the rabbit now clutched to her chest, and went to his own bedroom. The house settled around him with familiar creaks and sighs, the sound of a life that was small but his, ordinary but real. He thought about Isabella one more time before sleep, about the shock in her eyes, about the longing when she'd asked about Emma, about the genuine kindness in her wish for beautiful dreams. Then he let it go, the way he'd learned to let go of anything that didn't serve the life he was building, brick by careful brick, for his daughter. In another part of the city, in a penthouse apartment that overlooked everything but revealed nothing, Isabella Grant stood at her window and wondered what it would feel like to choose one real thing over an entire empire of perfect illusions. She didn't know it yet, but that wondering would cost her everything, and it would be worth it. The weekend passed in the comfortable rhythm that Daniel had built over 3 years of single fatherhood. Saturday morning, pancakes with too much syrup. A trip to the park where Emma insisted on showing him every interesting stick and unusual rock. Afternoon homework at the kitchen table where she practiced her letters with fierce concentration. Sunday laundry and grocery shopping and the small domestic tasks that felt like meditation. On Saturday night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel allowed himself to look up Isabella Grant. The search results were exactly what he expected. Forbes features about her business acumen, society page photos from countless galas and fundraisers, a Wikipedia entry that read like a resume written by someone who'd never made a mistake. There were pictures of her with James Whitmore III, the senator's son she was reportedly engaged to, though Daniel noticed they never looked at each other the way people in love should look. There was one photo, buried several pages deep in the image search, that caught his attention. Isabella at maybe 22 or 23, accepting some kind of business award, and for just a moment before the flash, her guard was down. She looked tired. She looked alone. Daniel closed the browser and went to bed, trying not to think about tired eyes or whispered confessions or the way loneliness could wear expensive clothes. A Monday morning arrived with the sharp clarity of routine, Emma's alarm, breakfast, the careful dance of getting a 7-year-old ready for school, the drive to Jefferson Elementary, the kiss on her forehead before she ran to join her friends. "Love you, Dad," she called back, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Love you more," he called back, watching until she disappeared through the school doors. At work, Daniel buried himself in contracts and research, the comfortable anonymity of being good at his job without needing to be noticed. Whitmore and Associates was a mid-tier law firm that specialized in real estate transactions, not prestigious enough to make his mother proud, not small enough to feel personal. It paid the bills, offered decent benefits, and most importantly, let him leave at 5:30 every day to pick up Emma from after-school care. He made it until lunch before Marcus found him. "Conference room 2, the senior partner said, appearing at Daniel's cubicle with an expression that suggested this wasn't optional. "Now!" The conference room had windows overlooking the street, leather chairs around a table that tried too hard to look important, and Victor Hale waiting with the kind of stillness that made Daniel think of predators deciding whether to strike. Victor was in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested his clothes cost more than most people's mortgages, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that calculated everything. He didn't stand when Daniel entered. "Mr. Rowe," he said, his voice smooth and cold simultaneously. "Thank you for joining us. I wasn't aware I had a choice." Daniel remained standing, though Marcus gestured toward a chair. A smile touched Victor's mouth, not reaching anywhere near his eyes. Everyone always has choices. It's the consequences that vary. He gestured now, a minimal movement of his hand. "Please sit. This won't take long." Daniel sat, keeping his posture neutral, his expression calm. He'd learned early in his career that showing fear only encouraged certain kinds of people. "I'll be direct," Victor continued. "You made an impression at the Heritage Foundation Gala, on someone whose impressions matter considerably. I wasn't trying to make an impression." "No, I don't think you were. That's part of what made it problematic." Victor leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Isabella Grant is engaged to James Whitmore III. This engagement represents a significant alliance between the Grant family's business interests and the Whitmore family's political influence. It's been in development for years. It benefits a great many people." "I'm aware of the engagement," Daniel said carefully. "I'm not aware of why you're telling me this." "Because sometimes people get ideas," Victor said softly. "Sometimes people see someone like Isabella, beautiful, powerful, wealthy, and they think about possibilities that don't exist. They think about disrupting carefully constructed arrangements for their own benefit." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear, but anger, controlled and precise. "I went to a gala because my firm requested my attendance. I spoke to exactly 7 people, including the coat check attendant. I left early to go home to my daughter. If Miss Grant made an impression on me, it wasn't the kind you're concerned about." "Then we understand each other." Victor stood, smooth as oil on water. The Grant family values stability, Mr. Rowe. They value arrangements that work. They don't appreciate complications. I'm not a complication, Daniel said, standing as well. I'm a lawyer who went to a party and went home. Nothing more. Good. Victor moved toward the door, paused. Though I should mention, your performance reviews have been excellent. Your work on the Morrison acquisition was particularly impressive. There could be opportunities for someone with your talents if you continue to demonstrate good judgment. The carrot after the stick. So obvious it was almost insulting. I'll keep that in mind, Daniel said, his voice empty of everything he was feeling. When they were alone, Marcus sank into a chair and rubbed his face. That went better than I expected. What did you expect? Honestly, I don't know. Victor Hale doesn't usually involve himself in personnel conversations. The fact that he came here personally to warn you off means whatever happened at that gala scared someone important. Nothing happened, Daniel insisted, but even as he said it, he remembered, "Tonight, I'll make you mine." 4 words that had apparently caused enough ripples to bring Victor Hale to his door. Look, Marcus said quietly, I like you, Daniel. You're good at your job, you keep your head down, you don't play politics. But this, whatever this is bigger than you or me or this firm. The Grant family doesn't make suggestions, they make reality. If they want you to stay away from Isabella, you need to stay away. I am staying away, Daniel said, and he meant it. I have a daughter who needs me. I have a life that works. I don't need whatever this is. Then why do you look like someone just threatened something you care about? Daniel didn't answer because he didn't know how to explain that the threat itself was insulting, not because he wanted Isabella Grant, but because Victor Hale had assumed he could be manipulated with promises or frightened with warnings, had assumed that everyone had a price or a breaking point. He went back to his desk and worked until 5:30 exactly, then picked up Emma from after-school care and took her to the park, even though it was getting dark earlier now, even though there was homework waiting and dinner to make. They sat on the swings together, moving slowly back and forth, and she told him about her day, about the frog in science class, about the boy who'd said her drawing was weird but she thought it was interesting, about the math problem that finally made sense. Dad? She said eventually, her voice small in the dimming light. Yeah, sweetheart. Are you okay? You seem sad. Daniel stopped swinging, reached over to still hers, pulled her close. I'm perfect. You know why? Why? Because I get to be your dad. That's the best job in the whole world. She hugged him tight, her small arms fierce around his neck. You're good at it. Yeah? He pulled back to look at her face. The best, she confirmed solemnly. They went home to frozen pizza and spelling homework and a bedtime story about a brave mouse who went on adventures, and when Emma was finally asleep, Daniel sat in the dark living room and made a decision. Whatever Isabella Grant was dealing with, arranged marriages and family empires and whispered confessions in shadows, it wasn't his problem. He had Emma. He had his small life. That was enough. It had to be enough. But when he finally went to bed, he dreamed of tired eyes and loneliness and expensive clothes and the sound of perfect control shattering, and he woke up wondering if enough was the same thing as right. 3 weeks passed before he heard from Isabella again. 3 weeks of routine, of work and school and park visits and bedtime stories. 3 weeks of not thinking about charity galas or whispered confessions or the way loneliness could look like power if you dressed it up right. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, his desk phone rang with an internal extension he didn't recognize. Daniel Rowe, he answered, tucking the phone against his shoulder while he typed. Mr. Rowe, this is Catherine from reception. There's a package here for you, marked personal and confidential. Daniel frowned. I'm not expecting anything. Nevertheless, it's here. Would you like me to bring it up? I'll come down. The package was a simple cream envelope, expensive paper, his name written in elegant script across the front. No return address. Catherine handed it to him with poorly concealed curiosity, and Daniel took it back to his desk before opening it. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, the kind used for formal invitations. But instead of an invitation, there was a handwritten note. Mr. Rowe, I owe you an apology that can't be delivered in writing, and an explanation that you have no obligation to hear. If you're willing to spare 30 minutes, I'll be at the Riverside Cafe tomorrow at noon. I'll understand if you don't come. Isabella Grant. Daniel read it 3 times, looking for manipulation or seduction or any of the things Victor Hale had warned him about. Instead, he found what looked like humility, uncertainty, and a request instead of a demand. He should throw it away. Should pretend he never received it. Should protect the small, stable life he'd built from complications that wore designer clothes and whispered confessions. Instead, he found himself thinking about tired eyes in a photograph, about the longing in her voice when she'd asked about Emma, about the way she'd looked when she'd said, "I'll let you go," like letting go was something she'd never learned how to do. 30 minutes, she'd asked for. Just 30 minutes to apologize and explain. He could give 30 minutes to someone who looked that alone, couldn't he? Daniel put the card in his pocket and went back to work, trying not to think about tomorrow at noon, trying not to wonder what truth was worth whispering in shadows and then worth risking everything to explain in daylight. But he knew, even as he tried not to think about it, that he would go. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't building walls to protect yourself. Sometimes it's leaving them standing and walking through the door anyway, even when you know that what waits on the other side might change everything. The Riverside Cafe occupied a corner building with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the kind of November light that made everything look both sharper and softer at the same time. Daniel arrived at 11:55, 5 minutes that felt like insurance against seeming too eager or too reluctant, and found Isabella already there, sitting at a table in the back corner where the windows met and privacy was possible. She stood when she saw him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Her in a simple gray sweater and jeans that probably cost more than his suit, him in the same work clothes he wore every day, both of them awkward in a way that money couldn't fix. "Thank you for coming," Isabella said, and her voice carried the same uncertainty he'd heard in her note. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Daniel admitted, sliding into the seat across from her. "Right up until I walked through the door." A waiter appeared, took their orders, coffee for him, tea for her, and disappeared with the efficiency of someone who recognized when a conversation needed privacy. "I've been trying to figure out how to start this for 3 weeks," Isabella said, her hands wrapped around the menu she wasn't reading. "I've written 17 different versions of what I wanted to say to you. None of them felt right." "Maybe start with why," Daniel suggested. "Why you said what you said at the gala. Why you asked me here now." Isabella set down the menu, met his eyes directly. "Because I'm getting married in 6 months to a man I don't love, and watching you walk away that night was the first time I understood what I was actually losing." The honesty of it hit like cold water, shocking, clarifying, impossible to ignore. "I don't understand," Daniel said carefully. "You don't know me. We spoke for maybe 3 minutes. How could that make you understand anything?" "It wasn't about you specifically," Isabella said, though her expression suggested it was at least partly about him. "It was about watching someone choose something real over everything that room represented. You looked at your watch, and I could see it on your face, that you were counting the minutes until you could get back to your daughter. Like being in that ballroom with all that wealth and power was a prison, and she was freedom." The waiter returned with their drinks, and they both waited until he left before continuing. "I've been performing my entire life," Isabella continued, her voice lower now, more raw. "Perfect daughter, perfect student, perfect executive, perfect fiancé. I'm good at it. I'm so good at it that sometimes I forget I'm performing at all. But that night, watching you leave for something real, I couldn't remember the last time I chose anything just because I wanted to. Not because it was expected, not because it served family interests, not because it looked right, just because it mattered to me." Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, using the warmth to ground himself. "And you thought what? That I could be that real thing you chose?" "No." Isabella shook her head firmly. "No, I think that you could remind me what choosing something real even looks like. That maybe if I could understand why you left, I could understand why I want to so badly." "You want to leave your own life?" "I want to live my own life," she corrected. "There's a difference. I don't want to run away from responsibility. I just want to be responsible for choices I actually made instead of ones made for me before I was old enough to object." Daniel took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim. She looked different in daylight, in casual clothes, without the armor of a gala around her. She looked younger, more fragile, more human. "Tell me about the marriage," he said. "The one that was arranged for you." Isabella's laugh was short and bitter. "Where do I start? James Whitmore III and I have known each other since we were children. Our families decided when we were 15 that we'd be perfect together. His family's political connections, my family's business empire, a merger disguised as romance. We were engaged 2 years ago at a party that cost more than some people make in a lifetime, and we've been planning a wedding that will cement alliances across 3 states. Do you love him?" "I respect him," Isabella said carefully. "He's intelligent, ambitious, and he understands the world we live in. We have compatible goals." "That's not what I asked." She looked down at her tea, at the steam rising from the cup like small ghosts. "No, I don't love him. I don't think he loves me either, if I'm being honest. I think we're both very good at playing our parts." "Then why are you still doing it?" "Because walking away would destroy my family's plans. Because it would humiliate James and create political fallout. Because my father built an empire on relationships like this, and refusing the marriage would feel like burning down everything he worked for." She paused. "Because I've been preparing for this my entire life, and I don't know who I am if I'm not Isabella Grant, perfect daughter, perfect executive, perfect fiancé." Daniel set down his cup. "Can I tell you something? And you can't get offended because you asked me here." "Go ahead." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." Isabella flinched, but she didn't look away. "I know." "Do you? Because you're sitting here telling me you're going to marry someone you don't love, live a life you don't want, and become someone you're not, all because other people made plans for you, and you're acting like that's inevitable instead of a choice." It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple," Daniel interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's simple. You either choose to live your life or you don't. Everything else is just fear dressed up as responsibility." Isabella's eyes flashed with something, anger maybe, or recognition. "That's easy for you to say. You don't have a family empire depending on your decisions." "No, I have a 7-year-old daughter depending on mine. Every single day, I make choices about what kind of man I want her to see when she looks at me. Whether I want to teach her that you sacrifice your happiness for other people's expectations, or that you have the courage to live honestly even when it's hard." He leaned forward slightly. "Your family's empire will survive without you marrying James Whitmore. But will you survive becoming someone you're not?" The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. "I didn't ask you here to be my therapist," Isabella said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then why did you ask me here?" "Because—" She stopped, started again. "Because when I said those words to you at the gala, it was the first honest thing I'd said in years, and it terrified me. And then you just walked away, like my power and my money and my name meant nothing compared to tucking your daughter into bed, and I couldn't stop thinking about what it must feel like to have something that matters more than everything else." "It feels like freedom," Daniel said quietly, "and terror, and responsibility, all at the same time. It feels like you're not living for yourself anymore, but also like you're finally living the way you were meant to." "I want that," Isabella whispered. "I want something that matters that much." "Then you need to find it yourself," Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. "Not through me, not through rebellion against your family, not through running away from James. You need to figure out what you actually want, separate from all the expectations, and then you need to be brave enough to choose it." "What if I don't know how?" "Then you learn, one choice at a time, one honest moment at a time." He paused. "But Isabella, you can't use me as your escape route. I have a daughter who comes first, always. I have a life that's small but mine. I can't be the thing you run toward just because you're running away from something else." The words were kind but absolute, and Daniel watched Isabella absorb them, watched her perfect composure crack just enough to show the person underneath, scared, lost, desperate for something real. "I understand," she said finally. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have put this on you." "I'm not saying I can't be your friend," Daniel clarified. "I'm saying I can't be your answer. You still have to find that yourself." Isabella nodded, blinking rapidly against tears she was too proud to shed in public. How did you do it? After your wife died, how did you figure out how to keep going? The question caught Daniel off guard, piercing through his own armor to something tender underneath. I had to. Emma needed me, and that made everything else simple. Not easy, but simple. Every decision came down to one question. Is this good for her? Does this make me the kind of father she deserves? What if you don't have an Emma? What if you don't have anyone depending on you? Then you have to depend on yourself, Daniel said. You have to decide what kind of person you want to be and start making choices that build toward that, even when no one's watching. Especially when no one's watching. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe humming with quiet conversation around them, the November light shifting across the table between them. I'm going to break the engagement, Isabella said suddenly, her voice stronger now, more certain. I don't know when, and I don't know exactly how, but I can't go through with marrying James. I know that now. That's your choice to make, Daniel said carefully, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Make sure you're choosing something, not just running away from something else. What's the difference? Running away is about fear. Choosing is about hope. One leaves you empty, the other gives you something to build on. Isabella pulled a napkin from the dispenser, twisted it between her fingers. Will you tell me something about your daughter? About Emma? The request was so unexpected, so gentle, that Daniel felt his guard drop slightly. What do you want to know? Anything. Everything. What makes her laugh? What she's afraid of? What you love most about being her father? So Daniel told her. He told her about Emma's obsession with counting spots on ladybugs, about how she insisted on wearing mismatched socks because she said it made mornings more interesting, about the way she still couldn't say the word spaghetti without getting the syllables tangled. He told her about the night Emma had asked if her mother was proud of her from heaven, and how he'd had to step into the hallway to cry before he could answer. Isabella listened with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every detail, cataloging this glimpse into a life where love was messy and real and measured in bedtime stories instead of board meetings. She sounds extraordinary, Isabella said when he finished. She's 7, Daniel said with a smile. She's loud and stubborn, and she leaves her toys everywhere, and sometimes I find myself negotiating with a second grader like she's a tiny lawyer. But yeah, she's extraordinary. You're a good father. I'm a trying father, Daniel corrected. That's all any of us can be. Just keep showing up and trying. Isabella's phone buzzed on the table, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. She glanced at it, and Daniel saw her expression shift, saw the mask start to slide back into place. I have to go, she said, regret heavy in her voice. Conference call in 20 minutes. Empire Building waits for no one. Of course. Daniel stood when she did, and they faced each other across the small table, this unlikely pair who'd somehow stumbled into honesty. Thank you, Isabella said, for coming, for listening, for not letting me use you as an escape route. You're welcome. Daniel hesitated, then added, Isabella, you asked me earlier what I love most about being Emma's father. Can I tell you? Please. It's watching her become herself, watching her make choices and form opinions and develop into this complete person who's separate from me but connected to me. That's the best part, knowing I'm helping her grow into whoever she's meant to be, not who I want her to be. Isabella's eyes filled with tears she still wouldn't let fall. I hope someday someone loves me enough to want that for me. You have to love yourself enough to want it first, Daniel said gently. She nodded, gathered her coat and purse, and paused at the edge of the table. Can I ask you one more thing? Sure. If I do this, if I break the engagement, if I start making my own choices, can I tell you about it? Not for advice, not for approval, just to have someone who knows what it took to start? Daniel considered carefully. This was a line he could cross or not cross, a door he could leave open or close. The safe choice was to say no, to keep his distance from whatever storm was brewing in Isabella Grant's carefully controlled life. But he remembered the loneliness in that photograph, the longing in her voice when she'd asked about Emma, the raw honesty when she'd said she didn't know who she was if she wasn't perfect. You can tell me, he said, as a friend, nothing more. nothing less. As a friend, Isabella agreed, and for the first time since he'd met her, her smile looked genuine. Thank you, Daniel. She left the cafe with her head high, her mask back in place, ready to return to her empire. But Daniel thought he saw something different in the set of her shoulders. Not resignation, but determination, like she'd decided to fight instead of surrender. He finished his coffee alone, paid the check, and walked back to his office through the cold November afternoon, thinking about choices and courage and the difference between running away and running toward something. When he got back to his desk, there was a message from Victor Hale's office requesting a meeting. Daniel deleted it without responding. Whatever threats or promises Victor wanted to deliver could wait, because Daniel had made his own choice to be Isabella's friend if she needed one, to refuse to be anyone's weapon or escape route, and to keep putting Emma first in every decision that mattered. At 5:30 exactly, he picked up his daughter from after-school care. She ran to him the way she always did, backpack bouncing, and threw her arms around his waist. Dad! Dad! I got 100 on my spelling test. That's amazing, sweetheart. He lifted her up, spun her once, set her down. I'm so proud of you. Can we get ice cream to celebrate? It was Tuesday, not their usual ice cream night, and Daniel had planned to make dinner at home to stick to the routine that kept their lives stable and predictable. But watching Emma's hopeful face, thinking about Isabella's question about what he loved most about being a father, Daniel made a different choice. Absolutely, let's get ice cream. Really? Emma's eyes went wide. But it's Tuesday. Sometimes you change the rules to celebrate something important, Daniel said, taking her hand as they walked to the car. And getting 100 on your spelling test is definitely important. Is that like choosing what you want instead of what you're supposed to do? Emma asked with the kind of insight that sometimes surprised him. Exactly like that, Daniel said, wondering if his 7-year-old understood more about courage and choice than most adults he knew. Where'd you learn that? From you, Emma said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. You always tell me I get to choose who I want to be. Daniel stopped walking for a moment, crouched down to her level in the parking lot. You're right, I do tell you that. And do you know why? Why? Because choosing who you want to be is the bravest thing anyone can do. It's scary and hard, and sometimes people won't understand, but it's also the only way to be really, truly happy. Emma threw her arms around his neck, squeezed tight. I choose to be someone who gets ice cream on Tuesdays when they get 100 on spelling tests. Daniel laughed, genuine and full. That's an excellent choice. They got ice cream, chocolate chip for her, vanilla for him, and sat in the shop's window watching the world go by. And Emma told him everything about her day in the way only 7-year-olds can, where every detail matters and nothing is too small to share. Daniel listened with his full attention, but part of his mind was still on Isabella, wondering if she was sitting in her conference call thinking about choices and courage, wondering if she'd really have the strength to walk away from a life built on other people's expectations. It wasn't his problem. It wasn't his responsibility. He told her the truth. She had to find her own answers, make her own choices, be brave enough to build a life that was hers. But he hoped she would. For her own sake, he hoped she'd find whatever it took to choose freedom over fear. 3 days later, the news broke. Daniel was at his desk when Marcus appeared, his face pale, holding his phone like it contained a bomb that had already detonated. Have you seen this? Marcus asked, turning the screen toward Daniel. The headline read, Grant heiress calls off political wedding. Engagement to Whitmore's son ended abruptly. Below was a photo of Isabella, looking small and defiant at a press conference, facing down cameras and reporters with the kind of courage that made Daniel's chest ache. The statement was released an hour ago, Marcus said, his voice tight. Isabella Grant has officially ended her engagement to James Whitmore III, citing irreconcilable differences and a desire to pursue her own path. The families are reportedly furious. The political implications are significant. And Victor Hale— Let me guess, Daniel interrupted. Victor Hale is looking for someone to blame. He's looking for you specifically, Marcus confirmed. He knows you met with her. There are photos from the cafe, Daniel. Someone was watching. Daniel felt cold settle in his stomach, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. Of course someone was watching. Of course there were photos. People like Isabella Grant and Victor Hale didn't operate in a world where private conversations stayed private. I had coffee with her, Daniel said calmly. We talked. That's all. Victor doesn't care what happened. He cares that it looks like you influenced her decision. He's already started making calls, Daniel. Your career here is over. Then it's over, Daniel said, surprised by how little the prospect frightened him. I won't apologize for having a conversation with someone who asked for my time. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair beside Daniel's desk. You're not hearing me. This isn't just about your job here. Victor Hale has connections across this entire city. He can make sure you don't work anywhere in real estate law. He can do whatever he wants, Daniel interrupted, his voice steady. But he can't make me regret treating someone with basic human decency. Isabella made her own choice, Marcus. I didn't push her. I didn't manipulate her. I just told her the truth, that she had to find her own answers. And you think Victor will believe that? I don't care if he believes it, Daniel said, and realized as he spoke that it was true. I care about picking up my daughter on time and making her dinner and helping with her homework. Everything else is just noise. His desk phone rang, Victor Hale's extension. Daniel stared at it for 3 rings, then 4, then let it go to voicemail. You're not going to answer that? Marcus asked, incredulous. No, Daniel said. I'm not going to dance to Victor Hale's tune just because he's used to everyone else doing it. If he wants to talk to me, he can schedule a meeting like a professional instead of trying to intimidate me with phone calls. Marcus stood up slowly, studying Daniel like he was seeing him for the first time. I don't know if you're incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Maybe both, Daniel admitted, but I'm definitely done living afraid of people who think power means they can dictate everyone else's choices. After Marcus left, Daniel pulled up the news article again, read the full statement Isabella had released. It was brief, professional, and completely honest. She acknowledged the family's disappointment, expressed respect for James Whitmore, and stated simply that she could no longer commit to a life built on expectations rather than authentic choice. The comments section was brutal, as expected. People calling her selfish, ungrateful, spoiled. People speculating about affairs and scandals. But buried in the vitriol were other comments, from people who understood, who applauded her courage, who saw in her choice permission to examine their own compromises. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I did it. I'm terrified and exhilarated, and I have no idea what comes next, but I did it. Thank you for reminding me I could. IG. He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. You did it yourself. That's the only way it works. Proud of you. The response came immediately. Can I still tell you about it? As a friend? Daniel thought about Victor Hale's threats, about the career implications, about the safe choice that would protect his small, stable life. Then he thought about Emma at the ice cream shop, about choosing who you want to be, about courage looking like a 7-year-old asking for celebration on a Tuesday. Yes, he typed, as a friend. His phone rang again. Victor Hale, persistent as a shark. This time, Daniel answered. Mr. Rowe. Victor's voice was ice wrapped in silk. I believe we need to talk about your recent activities. No, we don't, Daniel said calmly. We need to talk about you respecting professional boundaries and understanding that I don't answer to you or the Grant family. I had a conversation with someone who asked for my time. That's protected behavior, both legally and ethically. Silence on the other end, sharp and dangerous. You're making a mistake, Victor said finally. That's my mistake to make, Daniel replied. Just like Isabella's choices are hers to make. You can't control everyone, Mr. Hale, no matter how much you're used to trying. He hung up before Victor could respond, his heart pounding but his hands steady. The rest of the day passed in a strange calm, like the eye of a hurricane. Daniel worked on his cases, ignored 3 more calls from Victor's office, and left at exactly 5:30 to pick up Emma. She was quiet in the car, more thoughtful than usual, and when they got home, she followed him into the kitchen instead of running off to play. Dad? She said, climbing onto a stool at the counter. Is something wrong? Daniel looked at his daughter, this small person who read him better than anyone, who deserved honesty even when honesty was complicated. Something might be changing at work, he said carefully. But whatever happens, we're going to be okay. You know why? Why? Because we have each other, and that's all that really matters. Everything else we can figure out. Emma nodded seriously, then said, "Did you do the right thing, even if it's hard?" "I did," Daniel confirmed. "I helped someone who needed a friend, and I told the truth even when people wanted me to lie. Those are always the right things." "Then it'll be okay," Emma said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "Good things happen when you do right things." Daniel wished the world worked that simply, but he didn't have the heart to tell her otherwise. Instead, he pulled her into a hug and held on tight, this small, bright soul who made every hard choice worth making. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table and did something he'd been avoiding for 3 years. He updated his resume. Not because he was afraid of Victor Hale's threats, but because he realized Marcus was probably right about one thing. His time at Whitmore and Associates was over, whether he quit or was pushed, and maybe that was okay. Maybe there were better places to work, places where being decent to someone didn't end your career, places where integrity mattered more than alliances. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Isabella. "The vultures are circling. Family meeting tomorrow. Victor's demanding I reconsider. James's father is threatening political consequences." "I'm scared, Daniel," he typed back. "Fear is normal. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. You made your choice. Now you have to stand by it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "What if I can't?" "You can. You already did the hardest part. You started. Now you just have to keep going." "Will you tell me something? Something true and real to remind me why this matters?" Daniel thought for a moment, then typed. "Tonight, Emma asked me if something was wrong. I told her the truth, that things might change, but we'd be okay because we have each other. And she said, 'Good things happen when you do right things.' I don't know if that's always true, but I know she's right, that doing right things is what matters, regardless of the outcome." The response came slowly. "She sounds wise beyond her years." "She's 7 going on 40, Daniel wrote back, "and she's the best thing that ever happened to me. Which is why I understand what you're fighting for. The right to build a life around things that matter to you, not things that matter to everyone else. Thank you for understanding, for not judging, for being a friend when I needed one." "That's what friends do," Daniel replied. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard, but you'll get through it." He set down his phone and sat in the quiet house, thinking about choices and consequences, about courage and fear, about the strange way life sometimes put people in each other's paths exactly when they needed each other most. Isabella Grant wasn't his responsibility. Her battles with her family weren't his to fight. But being her friend, offering support when she needed it, reminding her that she was more than the role she'd been assigned, that was something he could do. Something he would do, regardless of what it cost, because some things mattered more than safety. Some things mattered more than everything. The family meeting happened in the Grant Estate's main conference room, a space designed to intimidate with its mahogany panels and portraits of stern-faced ancestors who'd built empires and crushed anyone who stood in their way. Isabella sat at the long table, her father Richard at the head, her mother Catherine to his right, and Victor Hale positioned like a sentinel near the door, blocking any easy escape. Across from her sat Senator James Whitmore Sr. and his son, James III, whose expression suggested he'd been carved from the same expensive stone as the building itself. "Isabella," her father began, his voice carrying the controlled disappointment he'd perfected over 40 years of business negotiations, "perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone here what possessed you to make such a reckless decision without consulting your family." "It wasn't reckless," Isabella said, keeping her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "It was honest. I can't marry James, I don't love him, and he doesn't love me, and building a life on that foundation would be a mistake for everyone involved." "Love," Senator Whitmore said the word like it was something distasteful he'd found on his shoe. "You're 29 years old, Isabella. Surely by now you understand that successful marriages are built on compatibility, shared goals, and mutual benefit, not fairy tale romance." "I'm not asking for a fairy tale," Isabella replied, meeting his eyes directly. I'm asking for authenticity, for the chance to build something real instead of performing a role for the rest of my life. Real? Her mother's voice was sharp, cutting. You want to talk about real? Real is the political alliance your engagement created. Real is the business opportunities that merger would have provided. Real is the stability and security of knowing your future is planned and protected. What you're calling authenticity, darling, is just selfishness dressed up as self-discovery. The words stung because they echoed every doubt Isabella had been fighting since the moment she'd released her statement to the press. Was she being selfish? Was she destroying something valuable just because she wanted something different? Then she remembered Daniel's voice at the cafe. You either choose to live your life or you don't. Everything else is just fear dressed up as responsibility. If wanting to make my own choices is selfish, Isabella said carefully, then I'm willing to be selfish. But I don't think it is. I think it's the minimum requirement for living an honest life. An honest life? Her father leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. And what exactly does that look like for you, Isabella? Have you thought beyond this moment of rebellion? Do you have a plan? I plan to continue running the projects I'm responsible for at Grant Real Estate, Isabella said, though she could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. I plan to prove that I can contribute to this family's success on my own terms, not just through a strategic marriage. That won't be possible. Victor spoke for the first time, his voice calm and final. Your father and I have discussed this. If you refuse to reconsider your decision, your position at Grant Real Estate will be eliminated. You'll retain your trust fund, of course, but your active role in the company's operations will end. The blow landed exactly as intended. Isabella felt the air leave her lungs, felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The company was her life. She'd spent 7 years building her reputation there, proving herself capable, earning respect through results rather than just her last name. You're firing me? She looked at her father, searching for some sign of hesitation, some hint of paternal love beneath the corporate calculation. Dad, you're really going to fire me because I won't marry someone I don't love? I'm protecting the company from instability, Richard said, and his voice was almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Your decision has created uncertainty about our family's reliability. James has already withdrawn support for the Riverside development. The Whitmore political connections that would have opened doors in 3 states are now closed to us. Your choice has consequences, Isabella. I'm simply ensuring those consequences don't extend to everyone else who depends on Grant Real Estate. This is blackmail, Isabella said, her voice shaking now. You're trying to force me back into the engagement by making it impossible for me to survive otherwise. We're giving you a choice, her mother corrected. The same choice you're demanding for yourself. You can choose your romantic idealism, or you can choose your family and everything we've built. But you can't have both. Isabella looked at James III, who'd sat silent through the entire exchange. You're okay with this? With them forcing me to marry you? James shrugged, and for a moment his mask slipped enough to show something almost like sympathy. I always knew you were too good for this arrangement, Isabella. Part of me hoped you'd find the courage to walk away. But if you do, you should know it won't be easy. Our families don't forgive betrayal lightly. It's not betrayal to choose myself, Isabella said, though her voice carried less conviction than she wanted. That's a lovely sentiment, Senator Whitmore said, standing now, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. But sentiment doesn't pay bills or maintain social standing or protect you when you've made powerful people angry. You've been living in a bubble of privilege your entire life, young lady. Break this engagement and you'll discover very quickly how cold the world is for people without family support. He left without waiting for a response, and after a moment, James III followed, pausing only to say quietly, I'm sorry, Isabella. For what it's worth, I hope you find whatever you're looking for. Then it was just Isabella and her parents and Victor, the silence heavy with ultimatums and consequences. You have 48 hours to decide, her father said, gathering his papers with the same efficiency he brought to every business transaction. Announce your reconciliation with James or clean out your office. Those are your options. And if I choose option 3? Isabella asked, her voice steadier now, anger replacing fear. If I walk away from all of it, the engagement, the company, the family name, Then you'll discover that the trust fund has certain conditions, Victor said smoothly. Conditions that include maintaining family standing and not bringing embarrassment to the Grant name. Break the engagement, and you'll find those funds frozen, pending a review of your behavior. So you're threatening to cut me off completely? Isabella stood, needing to be on her feet for this. Unless I agree to marry someone I don't love and live a life I don't want. We're protecting our interests, her father corrected. The same way you're protecting yours. The difference is we understand that sometimes protection requires difficult choices. Catherine Grant, who'd been quiet for several minutes, finally spoke, and her voice carried a weariness that surprised Isabella. Darling, do you really think you'll be happier alone and struggling than you would be with James and secure? Do you honestly believe that whatever you're chasing is worth losing everything? I don't know, Isabella admitted, the honesty costing her. But I know that if I go through with this marriage, if I let you bully me into living your version of my life, I'll never forgive myself. And eventually, I'll stop forgiving you too. Her mother's expression flickered, pain maybe or recognition, but it passed quickly, replaced by the same controlled disappointment that seemed to be the family's default emotion. 48 hours, her father repeated. Use them wisely. They left her alone in the conference room, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who'd probably made similar choices, who'd sacrificed love for power and called it wisdom. Isabella sank back into her chair, her hands trembling now that no one was watching, her mind racing through calculations she didn't want to make. Without the company, without her trust fund, without her family's support, what did she have? A degree from an excellent university that was 7 years out of date. Experience in a field where her family's name had opened every door. A network of contacts who were really her father's contacts, her family's allies, people who would vanish the moment the Grant name became a liability instead of an asset. She pulled out her phone, stared at Daniel's last message. Tomorrow's going to be hard, but you'll get through it. Had he known it would be this hard? Had he understood what choosing herself would actually cost? She typed, "They're taking everything. My job, my trust fund, everything. Unless I go back to James within 48 hours, I don't know what to do." The response came faster than she expected. "Yes, you do. You knew it would be hard. You knew there would be consequences. The question isn't what to do. It's whether you have the courage to do what you already know is right." Easy for you to say. You're not losing everything. I lost everything 3 years ago when my wife died. Everything except Emma. And that taught me that the only things you can actually lose are the things that matter. Everything else is just noise. Isabella stared at the words, feeling tears prick behind her eyes. "I'm scared, Daniel." Fear means you're doing something that matters. It means you're alive and fighting for something real. That's good. That's exactly where you should be. She wanted to ask him to meet her, to sit across from her and remind her why courage mattered, why choosing yourself was worth the cost. But she knew that wasn't fair. Daniel had his own life, his own responsibilities, and she couldn't keep using him as a crutch when the walking got hard. "Thank you," she typed instead, "for being honest even when honesty isn't comforting. That's what friends do. Now go figure out who you are when no one's telling you who to be. That's the only way forward." Isabella left the conference room and walked through the Grant estate, past the library where she'd studied as a child, past the formal dining room where she'd learned to make small talk with strangers, past the grand staircase she'd descended in couture gowns for parties that all blurred together into one endless performance. She'd grown up here, had her first kiss in the garden, had cried in her childhood bedroom when her first real business deal fell through. But walking through these halls now, she felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. Victor Hale found her in the conservatory, standing among the orchids her mother cultivated with the same precision she brought to social climbing. "Miss Grant," he said, his voice carrying that same smooth threat. "A word, if you have a moment." I don't work for you, Victor. I don't have to give you my time anymore." "True, but you might want to hear what I have to say about Daniel Rowe." Isabella turned slowly, something cold settling in her chest. "What about him?" "He's been let go from Whitmore and Associates, effective immediately. I made some calls, pulled some strings. Nothing illegal, you understand, just business. and I've ensured that his reputation in real estate law has been thoroughly compromised. He won't work in this city again, not in his field. You destroyed his career. The words came out flat, dead, because he had coffee with me. I destroyed his career because he interfered with Grant family business, because he encouraged you to make reckless decisions that have cost us significant political capital. Actions have consequences, Miss Grant. I thought you should understand that your choices don't just affect you. Isabella felt rage rise in her throat, hot and choking. He didn't encourage me to do anything. He told me to make my own choices. That's all. And you did. And now he's paying the price. Victor adjusted his cufflinks, a casual gesture that made her want to scream. Of course, if you were to reconsider your position, if you were to announce your reconciliation with James Whitmore, I'm sure I could make some calls. Restore Mr. Rowe's reputation. Perhaps even find him a better position than the one he lost. This is disgusting, Isabella whispered, using an innocent person as leverage against me. This is the world you live in, Victor corrected. The world your family built. You can pretend to be above it. You can make noble speeches about authenticity and choice. But the reality is that power has responsibilities. And when you shirk those responsibilities, other people suffer. He left her standing among the orchids, his words hanging in the air like poison. Isabella pulled out her phone with shaking hands, called Daniel directly instead of texting. He answered on the third ring. Isabella, are you okay? Victor fired you. The words tumbled out. And he's blackballing you across the city. And it's my fault, Daniel. It's all my fault because you tried to help me, and now you're paying for it. I know, Daniel said, his voice calm. I got the termination notice this afternoon. You know? And you're not angry? At Victor? Sure. At you? No, I made my own choices, Isabella. I knew there could be consequences. I chose to help you anyway because it was the right thing to do. But your career, your job, how are you going to support Emma? I'll figure it out. I always do. There was a pause, then, Isabella, is Victor using this as leverage against you, trying to make you feel responsible so you'll go back to James? He said if I reconcile with James, he'll restore your reputation, find you a better position. And you're actually considering it. It wasn't a question. I can't let you lose everything because of me, Isabella said, tears finally spilling over. That's not fair. That's not right. You know what's not right. Daniel's voice carried an edge now, sharp and absolute. Letting Victor Hale manipulate you by using me as a weapon. You know what's not fair? Throwing away your courage because someone found a new way to threaten you. I can handle losing my job, Isabella. I can't handle watching you surrender your life because someone convinced you that you're responsible for everyone else's choices. But you helped me, you were kind to me, and now you're suffering for it. And I'd do it again, Daniel said firmly, because kindness matters more than consequences, and friendship matters more than careers. But Isabella, if you go back to James to save me, it won't save me. It'll just prove that Victor was right, that everyone has a price, that threats work, that power always wins. And that's a world I don't want to live in, and it's definitely not a world I want Emma to inherit. Isabella sank onto one of the wrought iron benches, her free hand pressed against her mouth to muffle the sobs trying to escape. What do I do? She whispered. How do I make this right? You don't make it right, Daniel said gently. You accept that sometimes doing the right thing has costs, and you pay those costs anyway. You stand by your choice not because it's easy or safe or because everyone supports it, but because it's yours. That's the only way any of this means anything. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. You already proved it by walking away in the first place. Now you just have to keep walking, even when they try to make you turn around. After they hung up, Isabella sat in the conservatory until the light faded, until the orchids became shadows and the temperature dropped, and one of the household staff came to ask if she needed anything. No, she said, I don't need anything. But that was a lie. She needed courage. She needed strength. She needed to believe that choosing herself was worth the cost, even when that cost kept climbing. The next morning, Isabella woke in her childhood bedroom and made a list. Not of what she was losing, that list would break her, but of what she actually had that was hers, independent of the Grant name. The list was shorter than she wanted it to be. A degree in business and architecture, 7 years of professional experience, though tainted now by her family name. A few friendships that might survive her family's disapproval, though she wasn't sure which ones. A car that was technically in her name, though purchased with family money. Some jewelry, some clothes, some books. Nothing that would pay rent. Nothing that would support the kind of life she'd always lived. She opened her laptop and started searching job listings, her heart sinking with each click. Entry-level positions that wouldn't pay enough to cover a studio apartment. Mid-level positions that required connections she'd lose the moment she defied her family. Senior positions that she was qualified for but would never get without references, without her family's backing, without the name that had opened every door she'd ever walked through. Her phone rang, James III, calling from his personal number. "Isabella," he said when she answered, "I wanted to call before you make your final decision." "To convince me to come back?" "No, to tell you I respect what you're doing, and to offer you something." Isabella waited, suspicious. "My mother has a friend who runs a small architecture firm in Portland," James continued. "It's not glamorous, and it doesn't pay what you're used to, but it's legitimate work. Real work, not just a position bought with family connections. If you're serious about making your own way, I can get you an interview. What you do with that interview is up to you." "Why would you help me?" Isabella asked, genuinely confused. "I'm walking away from you, humiliating you publicly, damaging your family's political standing." "Because you're braver than I am," James said simply. "I'm going to marry whoever my father picks next. I'm going to build the political career he's planned for me. And I'm going to live the life I was assigned because I don't have the courage to do anything else. The least I can do is help someone who does. James, don't thank me. Just promise me something. When you build your own life, when you figure out who you are without all of this, promise you'll remember that some of us are still in here, still performing, still pretending. And maybe someday we'll find our own courage." He hung up before she could respond. Isabella added the contact information James texted her to her list of actual assets. One job prospect in Portland, 2,000 miles from everyone she knew, from everything familiar. It wasn't much, but it was something. She spent the rest of the day quietly packing her personal belongings, clothes that were hers, jewelry that held memories instead of just value, photographs from before her life became a performance. She moved through the Grant estate like a ghost, and her parents gave her space, probably hoping the reality of what she was losing would change her mind. That evening, she drove to Daniel's address, which she'd looked up in a moment of weakness days ago, but never used. It was a modest house in a family neighborhood, with a small yard and a fence that needed painting and absolutely nothing that screamed wealth or power. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, arguing with herself about whether showing up uninvited was appropriate, whether she was using him again, whether she had any right to pull him further into her mess. Then the front door opened and Emma came running out, chasing a ball that had gotten away from her. She was small and bright-eyed and completely unself-conscious, and when she saw Isabella's car, she stopped and waved with the kind of open friendliness that children have before the world teaches them to be cautious. Daniel appeared in the doorway, saw Isabella, and his expression shifted through surprise to concern to something that might have been welcome. "Emma, inside," he called gently. "Dinner in 5 minutes." "Okay, Dad." Emma grabbed her ball and bounded back into the house, all energy and motion and uncomplicated joy. Daniel walked to Isabella's car and she rolled down the window. "Hi," she said, feeling foolish. "I'm sorry for just showing up. I probably should have called." "It's okay," Daniel said, though he looked tired in a way that made her chest ache. "Rough day. 48 hours to decide my entire future. You?" "Applied to 14 different positions. Got rejected from 3 already. The rest will probably follow." He shrugged. "But Emma doesn't know yet, and I have enough savings to cover us for a few months while I figure out next steps, so it could be worse." "Daniel, I'm so sorry." "Don't," he interrupted gently. "We already talked about this. You're not responsible for Victor Hale being vindictive. You're responsible for your own choices. That's all." Isabella took a shaky breath. "James offered me a job lead in Portland. Architecture firm, entry-level position, despite my experience, probably pays a third of what I'm used to making. But it's real. It's mine. Are you going to take it?" "I don't know. Portland is far from everything I know. Starting over completely at 29 with no safety net, it's terrifying. Most worthwhile things are, Daniel observed, but the question isn't whether it's scary. The question is whether it's yours. Emma appeared at the front door again, calling out, "Dad, spaghetti's going to get cold." 2 minutes, sweetheart, Daniel called back, then turned to Isabella. "Do you want to come in? Have dinner with us? It's nothing fancy, just pasta and store-bought sauce, but I couldn't impose," Isabella said quickly. "It's not imposing if I'm inviting you, and honestly, you look like you could use a reminder of what real life looks like when nobody's performing." So Isabella found herself sitting at Daniel's small kitchen table, watching him drain pasta while Emma set out plates with serious concentration, and feeling more nervous than she'd felt walking into any boardroom or gala. "This is Isabella," Daniel introduced when Emma looked at her with open curiosity. "She's a friend of mine from work. Well, former work now." "Hi," Emma said cheerfully. "Do you like spaghetti? Dad says it's technically called spaghetti, but I call it noodles because it's more fun to say." "I love noodles," Isabella said, her voice catching slightly on the simple truth of it. They ate together, Emma chattering about her day, about the science experiment with vinegar and baking soda, about the boy who tried to trade her chips for cookies and how she negotiated for both, about the book she was reading about a girl who discovered a secret garden. "She's alone," Emma explained, gesturing with her fork in a way that made Daniel gently remind her about table manners. "But then she finds the garden, and it's like she's not alone anymore because she has something that's just hers, you know?" "I know exactly what you mean," Isabella said softly. Daniel watched the two of them talk, something unreadable in his expression. After dinner, Emma asked if Isabella wanted to see her room, and Daniel nodded permission. Emma's room was exactly what you'd expect from a 7-year-old. Stuffed animals arranged with careful logic, drawings taped to the walls, books stacked on shelves, organized by some system only she understood. But what caught Isabella's attention was a bulletin board covered in photographs. Emma and Daniel at the park. Emma with an older woman who must have been the grandmother, and several photos of a beautiful woman with Emma's eyes and Daniel's smile, the mother who'd died 3 years ago. "That's my mom," Emma said, noticing where Isabella was looking. "She's in heaven now, but Dad says she's still watching over us." "She's beautiful," Isabella said truthfully. "Yeah, Dad says I look like her. Sometimes that makes him sad, but also happy at the same time. It's complicated." Emma flopped onto her bed. "Are you sad about something?" The question, delivered with such straightforward innocence, nearly broke Isabella's composure. "Yeah," she admitted. "I'm figuring out some complicated things." "Dad's good at helping with complicated things," Emma offered. "He always tells me that hard things are just opportunities to be brave." "Your dad is very wise." "I know," Emma said matter-of-factly. "But don't tell him I said that. He'll get a big head." Isabella laughed, genuine and surprised, and Emma grinned at her like they were sharing a secret. When Isabella came back downstairs, Daniel was washing dishes at the sink. "She's amazing," Isabella said, leaning against the counter. "You're doing an incredible job with her." "I'm trying. Some days are better than others." He dried his hands, turned to face her. "Isabella, can I ask you something? And I want you to be honest." "Okay, but are you here because you need a friend, or because you're looking for someone to validate a decision you've already made?" Isabella considered carefully. "Both, maybe? I think I know what I need to do. I just don't know if I have the strength to do it alone." "Then let me tell you something Emma's mother told me right before she died." Daniel's voice was quiet, remembering. "She said that courage isn't something you feel, it's something you do. You don't wait until you feel brave, you act brave and the feeling follows. Sometimes it follows right away, sometimes it takes years, but the action comes first." "Act brave," Isabella repeated, "even when I'm terrified." "Especially when you're terrified. That's when it counts the most." Isabella looked around the small kitchen, at the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, at the mismatched dishes in the drying rack, at the evidence of a life that was small but real and chosen and loved. "I'm going to Portland," she said, the decision crystallizing as she spoke it out loud. "I'm going to take the job interview James set up. I'm going to tell my parents tomorrow that I'm not changing my mind, that they can keep their company and their trust fund and their perfect plans. I'm going to figure out who I am when nobody's telling me who to be. Good, Daniel said simply. I'm going to lose everything. No, you're going to trade everything you had for everything you actually want. There's a difference. Isabella felt tears threaten again, but this time they felt different, not like grief, but like relief. Like finally, after 29 years of performing, she was about to step off stage. Can I ask you something now? She said. Sure. When you lost your wife, when everything fell apart, how did you know you'd survive it? I didn't, Daniel admitted. But I had Emma, so I had to try. And trying was enough, even when I didn't believe I'd make it. The trying itself was what saved me. I don't have an Emma. I don't have anyone depending on me. Then you have yourself. And Isabella, you're worth trying for. You're worth saving, even if you're the only one doing the saving. The words settled into her chest, warm and heavy and true. She left Daniel's house an hour later after Emma had insisted on showing her the secret handshake she'd invented and made Isabella promise to remember it. Driving back to the Grant estate, Isabella felt different, not lighter exactly, but more solid, like she'd finally found the ground beneath her feet. The next morning, she walked into her father's office and placed her resignation letter on his desk. I'm taking Portland, she said before he could speak. I'm walking away from the company, from the trust fund, from everything you're holding over my head. And I'm not reconciling with James. Not tomorrow, not ever. Richard Grant looked at the letter, then at his daughter, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or respect. You're making a mistake, he said, but the words lacked their usual conviction. Maybe, Isabella agreed, but it's my mistake to make, and that's worth everything you're taking from me. She walked out of his office, out of the Grant estate, and didn't look back. 2 weeks later, she was in Portland, living in a studio apartment that cost more than she'd expected, but less than she'd feared, working at Morrison & Associates Architecture, and learning what it felt like to earn approval instead of inheriting it. It was hard. Some days it was excruciating, but it was hers. And slowly, carefully, she started to discover who Isabella Grant was when no one was writing her script. The first month in Portland taught Isabella that pride had a price, and that price was counted in ramen noodles and bus passes, and the particular exhaustion that comes from working harder than you ever have for less recognition than you've ever received. Morrison & Associates Architecture was a legitimate firm with solid clients and high standards, but it wasn't the Grant real estate empire where her name had carried weight and opened doors. Here, she was just another junior architect with decent credentials and zero proven track record independent of her family name. Her boss, Margaret Morrison, was a woman in her late 50s who'd built her firm from nothing and had no patience for privilege or excuses. She'd hired Isabella based on James Whitmore's recommendation with clear skepticism, and she made sure Isabella understood that the family connection that secured the interview wouldn't protect her job if she couldn't perform. I don't care who your father is, Margaret had said on Isabella's first day, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed Isabella's portfolio. I care whether you can meet deadlines, work with clients who have terrible taste but final approval, and produce designs that are both beautiful and functional within budget constraints. Can you do that? I can, Isabella had said, hoping it was true. The work itself was different from what she'd done at Grant Real Estate, where she'd overseen massive commercial developments with teams of people executing her vision. Here, she was part of small teams working on residential projects, community centers, small business renovations, the kind of work that mattered deeply to individual clients, but would never make the architectural journals or win prestigious awards. Her first project was a renovation of a historic house being converted into a bed and breakfast. The clients were a married couple in their 60s who'd saved for years to buy the property, and they had opinions about everything from the tile in the bathrooms to the exact shade of paint for the exterior trim. They questioned Isabella's suggestions, challenged her designs, and made her defend every choice with practical arguments rather than aesthetic philosophy. It was humbling and infuriating and somehow more satisfying than any of the multi-million-dollar projects she'd managed with her family name behind her. They trust me, she told Daniel during one of their regular phone calls, her voice carrying surprise even weeks after she'd started. Not because of my last name or my family's reputation, but because I'm listening to what they actually want and finding ways to make it work within their budget. It's completely different from anything I've done before. How does it feel? Daniel asked, and she could hear Emma singing something in the background, her voice bright and off-key. Terrifying, exhilarating, real. Isabella shifted on her second-hand couch, looking around her studio apartment with its ancient radiator and questionable water pressure. How are things there? Any luck with the job search? Daniel's pause told her everything before his words did. I've expanded my search beyond real estate law. Turns out Victor Hale's reach is extensive, but it's not infinite. I have an interview next week with a small firm that does family law and estate planning. Not what I studied for, but it's honest work and they don't care about Grant family politics. Daniel, I'm so sorry. Stop apologizing, he interrupted gently. We've been through this. Victor's vindictiveness is his choice, not your fault. Besides, maybe this is what I needed. A push to find something that matters more than just paying bills. How's Emma handling everything? She doesn't know the details, just knows Dad's looking for new opportunities. His voice softened. She asked about you yesterday. Wanted to know if you'd figured out your complicated things yet. Isabella felt something warm unfold in her chest. Tell her I'm working on it and that I still remember our secret handshake. She'll like that. After they hung up, Isabella sat in the gathering darkness of her apartment, listening to the city sounds that were different from what she'd grown up with. Fewer sirens, more rain, voices speaking with Pacific Northwest accents instead of East Coast precision. She was alone in a way she'd never been before, without family or old friends or the safety net of inherited wealth, and some nights that loneliness felt like it might swallow her whole. But other nights, like tonight, it felt like freedom. 3 weeks later, Daniel called with news delivered in a voice she couldn't quite read. I got the job, he said. Henderson and Associates Family Law. It's smaller than Whitmore, the pay is less, but Margaret Henderson is brilliant and decent, and she actually laughed when I told her Victor Hale had blackballed me. Said anyone Victor considered a threat was probably worth hiring. Daniel, that's wonderful, Isabella said, genuine relief flooding through her. When do you start? 2 weeks, which gives me time to figure out the new schedule with Emma's school and aftercare. He paused. Isabella, there's something else. Something I need to tell you, and I'm not sure how you're going to take it. Her stomach tightened. Okay. Your father called me, personally, at my house. Isabella sat down hard on her couch. What? When? Yesterday. He showed up while Emma was at school, said he wanted to talk man to man about your situation. Daniel's voice carried an edge now, carefully controlled anger. He offered me money, Isabella, a significant amount of money, to convince you to come home, to tell you that you'd proven your point and it was time to rejoin the family. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. He tried to bribe you. He tried to bribe me, framed it as compensation for the career damage Victor caused, as a gesture of goodwill, as an investment in your future happiness. But the condition was clear. Get you to come home, get you to reconcile with James, and the money plus a new position at a prestigious firm would be mine. What did you tell him? Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. I told him that your choices are yours to make, that friendship isn't something I sell regardless of the price, and that he should be ashamed of himself for trying to manipulate his daughter through me instead of just talking to her directly. Daniel's voice carried quiet fury. Then I told him to leave my property before I called the police. Isabella pressed her hand against her mouth, overwhelmed by gratitude and guilt and rage at her father's presumption. He had no right to involve you like that. No, he didn't, but it tells you something important. They're getting desperate. Your father doesn't make personal appeals to people he considers beneath him unless he's running out of options. You walking away actually rattled them. Good, Isabella said fiercely. Let them be rattled. Let them understand that I'm serious. There's more, Daniel continued. After your father left, I did some thinking about why he came to me instead of James or your mother or anyone else in your old circle. And I realized I'm the only person in your new life that they know about. I'm the only connection they have to who you're becoming, which means they're probably monitoring our communications, maybe even this call. Isabella felt cold settle in her stomach. You think they're listening right now? I think it's possible. Victor has resources and no moral boundaries. So I want to say something on the record, in case anyone is listening. Daniel's voice strengthened, became formal and absolute. Isabella Grant is not for sale. Her friendship is not for sale. Her future is not for sale. And anyone who continues trying to purchase, manipulate, or control her through me will find themselves facing legal action for harassment. Are we clear? Silence on the line, then Isabella's shaky laugh. You just threatened my family and Victor Hale on a potentially recorded phone call. I stated facts and boundaries on a potentially recorded phone call, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless. Maybe both. But I'm definitely done letting powerful people think they can use me as a weapon against someone I care about. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them had intended. Someone I care about. Not just a friend, not just a colleague, but someone who mattered in a way that defied easy categorization. Daniel, Isabella started, not sure what she wanted to say. Don't, he interrupted gently. Don't overthink it. I care about you. You care about me. We're friends who respect each other and want each other to succeed. That's all it needs to be right now. Right now, Isabella repeated, testing the words, meaning it could be something else later? Meaning, right now you're in Portland building a new life, and I'm here building stability for Emma, and we're both figuring out who we are independent of all the chaos. Anything else is hypothetical. I hate hypotheticals, Isabella said, surprising herself with the honesty. I know. You like plans and certainty and clear paths forward, but sometimes the best things in life are the ones you don't plan for. After they hung up, Isabella sat with those words, turning them over like stones in a river, looking for their weight and meaning. She cared about Daniel. That much was undeniable. She admired his integrity, his devotion to Emma, his refusal to compromise his values even when it cost him professionally. She thought about him more than was probably appropriate for someone who was supposed to be focused on building her own independent life. But was it real? Or was she just gravitating toward the first person who'd treated her like a human being instead of a commodity? Was she falling for Daniel, or just falling for the idea of someone who saw her clearly and still chose to be kind? The questions followed her through the following weeks as Portland's autumn deepened into winter, as her work at Morrison & Associates became less terrifying and more challenging in satisfying ways, as she learned to budget for groceries and cook for one and find joy in small victories like a design approved on the first presentation or a client's genuine gratitude. She made friends slowly, other architects at the firm who invited her to drinks after work, neighbors in her building who nodded hello in the hallway, the barista at the coffee shop who started making her usual order without asking. None of them knew about the Grant real estate empire, or her broken engagement, or the family fortune she'd walked away from. They just knew Isabella, junior architect with a good eye for design and a tendency to work too late. It was strange and lonely and absolutely liberating. Margaret Morrison became an unlikely mentor, someone who demanded excellence without cruelty, who corrected Isabella's mistakes with practical advice rather than judgment. One afternoon, 6 weeks after Isabella started, Margaret called her into the office. The Riverside project, Margaret said without preamble. The bed and breakfast renovation. The clients want to expand the scope. They're buying the property next door, and they want to integrate it into the design. They specifically requested you to lead the expansion. Isabella felt surprise and pride war in her chest. They requested me? They said you're the first architect who's actually listened to what they want, instead of trying to impose some grand vision they can't afford and don't need. So Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying Isabella over her reading glasses. That's good work, Isabella. That's the kind of reputation that builds careers, not flash or family name, but genuine client relationships built on respect and delivery. Thank you, Isabella said, meaning it more than Margaret could know. I'm curious about something, Margaret continued. You've been here 6 weeks and you're good at your job. Better than I expected when James Whitmore called in that favor. But you work like someone trying to prove something, like you're afraid if you slow down for even a moment, someone will realize you don't belong here. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. I'm just trying to do good work. You're trying to outrun something, Margaret corrected, and while that drive produces results, it's not sustainable. Eventually, you need to stop running from whatever you left behind and start building towards something new. Otherwise, you're just going to burn out. Isabella looked down at her hands, at the calluses she'd developed from late nights drafting by hand when the computer felt too impersonal, at the ink stains that seemed permanent now. What if I don't know what I'm building toward? What if I only know what I'm running from? Then you figure it out, one project at a time, one decision at a time, until the shape of your life starts to look like something you recognize as yours. Margaret's voice softened slightly. Isabella, I don't know what happened with your family. James gave me the basics: broken engagement, family pressure, brave choice to start over. But I know running, and I know building, and they're not the same thing. At some point, you have to choose which one you're doing. The conversation stayed with Isabella through the rest of the week, through long, rainy evenings in her apartment, through a phone call with Daniel where Emma hijacked the conversation to tell Isabella about the tooth she'd lost and the surprisingly generous tooth fairy payment. Dad says the tooth fairy is having a good year, Emma reported seriously, but I think he just feels bad because I was scared when it fell out during lunch. You were very brave, Isabella assured her, smiling at Daniel's visible eye roll in the background. That's what Dad said. Are you guys reading from the same script or something? After Emma handed the phone back to Daniel, Isabella asked, How much did the tooth fairy pay? $20, Daniel admitted. I know that's excessive, but she was genuinely frightened and I panicked. You're a good father. I'm an expensive tooth fairy. There's a difference. Daniel's voice shifted, became more serious. How are you really doing out there? Margaret called me last week, wanted to know if there were any issues she should be aware of with your family situation. What did you tell her? The truth, that you made a brave choice to live authentically, that your family is wealthy and influential and not particularly happy about your independence, but that you're fully committed to building your own career. She seemed satisfied. She told me I need to stop running and start building, Isabella said quietly, and I'm trying to figure out what that actually means. It means different things for different people, Daniel offered. For me, after Sarah died, building meant creating stability for Emma. Predictable routines, reliable presence, a home that felt safe even when everything else was chaos. What does it mean for you? Isabella looked around her small apartment, at the architectural drawings she'd pinned to the walls, at the books she'd bought from used stores, at the life that was modest but hers. I think it means learning to stop measuring my worth by what I've lost and start measuring it by what I'm creating. Learning to see this as building something new instead of running from something old. That sounds like progress. It feels terrifying. Most progress does, Daniel said, and Emma's voice interrupted in the background, demanding help with her math homework. Go, Isabella said. Help with the homework. I'll talk to you later. Isabella? Daniel's voice stopped her before she could hang up. You're doing great, better than great. I hope you know that. The words stayed with her through the evening, warm and sustaining in a way that felt both comforting and dangerous. She was building something in Portland, a career, a reputation, a life independent of her family name. But she was also building something with Daniel, across 2,000 miles of distance, something that existed in phone calls and text messages, and the way her heart lifted when she saw his name on her screen. The question was whether what they were building could survive the distance, the complications. The reality that his life was centered around Emma and hers was centered around proving she could make it alone. 2 months into her Portland life, Isabella received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter on expensive stationery, delivered to her apartment in an envelope with her mother's familiar script. She almost threw it away unopened, almost convinced herself that whatever Catherine Grant had to say wasn't worth the emotional energy of reading. But curiosity or hope or some combination of both made her open it. The letter was short, written in her mother's precise handwriting. Isabella, I've spent 2 months angry at you for walking away. Angry at what your choice cost the family politically and financially. Angry at the embarrassment, the questions, the gossip, but mostly angry because I was afraid. Afraid you were making a terrible mistake that would leave you alone and struggling and full of regret. Your father sees your departure as betrayal. I'm starting to see it as courage I never had. I married your father because it was expected. because it secured my family's position, because I was 22 and didn't know there were other options. I've had 30 years to build a life that looks perfect from the outside and feels empty from the inside. I don't want that for you. I'm not ready to defy your father or welcome you back publicly, but I want you to know that I understand why you left, and that I'm proud of you for being braver than I was. Your mother. Isabella read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, something cracking open in her chest that she hadn't realized was sealed shut. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't approval, wasn't even full support, but it was understanding. It was acknowledgement that her choice had merit, had meaning, had cost her mother something too. She called Daniel without thinking, without checking the time, and he answered on the second ring despite it being nearly midnight his time. Isabella, what's wrong? My mother wrote to me, she managed between shaky breaths. She said she's proud of me. She said I was brave. That's good, Daniel said gently. That's really good. She's still not going to defy my father, still not going to welcome me back publicly. But she understands. She sees what I did and she understands. Sometimes understanding is the first step, Daniel offered. The rest might take time. I didn't realize how much I needed her to see me, Isabella admitted. To really see me. Not just the role I was supposed to play. And now she does, and it hurts and heals at the same time. That's what real connection does, Daniel said. It hurts and heals simultaneously because it requires vulnerability, and vulnerability always carries risk. They talked for another hour. Isabella curled on her couch with the letter still in her hand, Daniel speaking quietly so he wouldn't wake Emma. And when they finally hung up, Isabella felt less alone than she had since leaving everything behind. The next day, she wrote her mother back. Not a long letter, not a detailed explanation, just a simple acknowledgement of the courage it took to send that first note, and a promise to keep her updated on her life in Portland if Catherine wanted to know. A week later, a response came. I would like that very much. It was a beginning. Small, tentative, nowhere near enough to bridge the full distance between them. But it was something real, something honest, and Isabella held on to it like proof that walking away didn't have to mean losing everyone forever. The holiday season approached with that particular dread that comes when you're spending it alone for the first time. Morrison and Associates closed between Christmas and New Year's, and most of Isabella's coworkers had families to return to, traditions that predated their professional lives. Daniel called 2 weeks before Christmas with an invitation that caught her completely off guard. Come spend Christmas with us, he said, no preamble, just the offer direct and genuine. I know Portland to here is a trek, and I know you're building your own life out there, but Emma's been asking about you and He paused, seemed to reconsider his words. I'd really like to see you, if you want to come. Isabella's first instinct was to say no, to protect the boundaries she'd been building, to avoid the complication of whatever was growing between them, to prove she could survive the holidays alone. But then she thought about Emma's bright voice, asking about her complicated things, about Daniel's quiet support through every phone call and crisis, about the way loneliness felt different from independence and how sometimes asking for connection was braver than standing alone. I'd like that, she said. If you're sure it's not an imposition. It's not an imposition, it's an invitation. There's a difference. So 2 days before Christmas, Isabella flew across the country with one small suitcase and a bag of carefully chosen gifts, her heart pounding with nervousness and anticipation in equal measure. Daniel met her at the airport, Emma bouncing beside him with barely contained excitement, and when Isabella walked through the arrival gate, Emma broke free and ran to her with the kind of wholehearted welcome that children give before they learn to guard their enthusiasm. You came. You actually came. I told Dad you would, but he said maybe you'd be too busy, and I said no way, because friends show up for each other, and Emma, breathe, Daniel interrupted gently, but he was smiling as he pulled Isabella into a brief hug that felt both natural and electric. Welcome. How was the flight? Long but good, Isabella said, acutely aware of how close he was, how different it felt to see him in person, instead of through a phone screen. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming. They drove to Daniel's house through streets decorated with lights and inflatable decorations, Emma providing running commentary on which houses had the best displays and which ones were trying too hard. The house itself was modest but warm, Christmas decorations clearly chosen by a 7-year-old for maximum sparkle and minimum sophistication. Emma decorated, Daniel said unnecessarily, gesturing at the tinsel explosion in the living room. I love it, Isabella said, and meant it. There was something joyful and unself-conscious about the decorations that made her chest ache with nostalgia for a childhood that had been all tasteful elegance and no genuine mess. That first evening was awkward, in the way that in-person meetings always are after months of phone intimacy. They moved around each other carefully, aware of proximity, of the difference between voices on a phone and actual physical presence. Emma filled the silences with chatter, demanding Isabella's attention for everything from showing her the gingerbread house they'd made to teaching her the elaborate card game she'd invented with rules that made no logical sense. Later, after Emma was in bed, Daniel and Isabella sat in the living room with mugs of tea, the Christmas tree lights casting soft shadows across the room. Thank you for coming, Daniel said again. I know it's complicated, having you here. Complicated how? Isabella asked, though she suspected she knew. Complicated because we're friends, but we're also, he gestured vaguely between them. We're also something that could be more than friends if we let it. And I don't know if that's fair to you, given everything you're trying to build in Portland. I don't want to be another thing pulling you in a direction you're not ready to go. Isabella set down her mug, took a breath, decided on honesty. What if I'm tired of protecting myself from possibilities? What if I'm ready to stop running from anything that feels complicated and start building toward things that matter, even if they're messy? Then we should probably talk about what we're actually doing here, Daniel said carefully. Because I care about you, Isabella. More than is probably wise given the distance and the complications and the fact that my life is built around Emma's needs. But I'm also not interested in something casual or undefined. If we're going to explore this, whatever this is, I need to know you're in it for real. I'm in it for real, Isabella said, the words coming easier than she expected. I don't know what that looks like practically. I'm in Portland, you're here. Emma has to come first and my career is just beginning. But I know that what we have matters to me. That you matter to me, and I'm done pretending otherwise to protect myself. Daniel reached across the couch, took her hand, and the simple contact felt momentous in its certainty. We'll figure out the logistics, one step at a time, one honest conversation at a time. But Isabella, I need you to promise me something. What? That if this stops working for you, if the distance or the complications or the reality of dating someone with a 7-year-old becomes too much, you'll tell me. You won't just disappear or pull away slowly. You'll tell me the truth, even if it's hard. I promise, Isabella said, if you promise the same thing. Deal. They sat together in the soft light of the Christmas tree, hands linked, the future uncertain but no longer frightening in quite the same way. Building something together, Isabella thought, not running from the past, but building toward something new. Christmas morning arrived with Emma's delighted shriek at discovering that Santa had indeed found their house, despite the complexity of modern GPS coordinates, as she'd been worried about for weeks. Isabella woke on the couch, where she'd insisted on sleeping despite Daniel's offers of his room, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar sounds of domestic joy, before Emma appeared at her side with barely contained energy. Isabella, you have to come see. Santa brought the art set I wanted, and also this book about butterflies, and there's a present for you too, even though you don't live here, which means Santa knows you're visiting, and that's so cool. Daniel appeared in the doorway, hair rumpled from sleep, holding a mug of coffee and wearing an expression that suggested this level of Christmas morning enthusiasm was both expected and slightly overwhelming. Breathe, Emma, he said mildly. Let Isabella wake up first. I'm awake, Isabella assured them, pulling herself upright and accepting the coffee Daniel handed her with gratitude. And I'd love to see what Santa brought. The living room was chaos in the best possible way. Wrapping paper scattered across the floor, Emma narrating the contents of each gift with elaborate detail, explaining the significance of the butterfly book because she'd been studying metamorphosis in science class and thought it was basically magic but real. There was indeed a small wrapped box with Isabella's name on it, and when she opened it, she found a delicate silver bracelet with a small compass charm. So you always know which direction you're going, Emma explained seriously. Dad said you're building a new life, and sometimes that means you need to remember where you are and where you want to go. Isabella felt tears prick behind her eyes, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of a 7-year-old who understood more about her journey than most adults. It's perfect. Thank you both. Emma picked it out, Daniel said quietly. I just paid for it. They spent the morning in comfortable domesticity. Emma insisted on making pancakes, which resulted in more batter on the counter than in the pan. Daniel cleaned while Isabella and Emma argued good-naturedly about whether chocolate chips constituted a legitimate breakfast ingredient, and eventually they all ended up on the couch watching a movie that Emma had seen approximately 17 times, but still found hilarious. It felt like family, not the performance of family that Isabella had grown up with, all formal dinners and appropriate conversation, but the real messy truth of it, sticky syrup on fingers, arguments about pancake toppings, a child's unselfconscious joy at simple pleasures. Later, while Emma was absorbed in building something elaborate with her new art supplies, Daniel pulled Isabella into the kitchen under the pretense of starting dinner preparations. How are you doing? He asked quietly. This is probably a lot, spending Christmas with us, being here instead of with your own family. I'm doing better than I expected, Isabella admitted. My mother sent me a package. It arrived yesterday, but I haven't opened it yet. I think I was afraid of what it might contain. Do you want to open it now? I can give you privacy. Isabella considered, then shook her head. No, I want to open it with you here, if that's okay. I think I need a witness in case it's... She paused, searching for words. In case it's not what I'm hoping for. Daniel reached into the cabinet where he'd stored the package that had arrived via overnight delivery. Expensive packaging that screamed Grant family resources. He set it on the counter between them, and Isabella stared at it like it might contain either salvation or condemnation. She opened it slowly, carefully preserving the wrapping in a way that suggested old habits died hard. Inside was a beautiful cashmere scarf in a shade of blue that Isabella had always loved, a handwritten card from her mother, and underneath, something that made her breath catch. A photo album, small and leather-bound, filled with pictures from her childhood. Not the formal portraits that lined the halls of the Grant estate, but candid shots. Isabella at 7, covered in mud from the garden, grinning with gap-toothed delight. Isabella at 12, rolling her eyes at the camera with preteen exasperation. Isabella at 16, caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame, looking young and unguarded and genuinely happy. She kept these, Isabella whispered, turning pages with careful fingers. All these pictures of me just being me, not performing, not perfect. She kept them. The card was simple. I thought you might want to remember who you were before we taught you who to be. You were always extraordinary, even when we couldn't see it. Merry Christmas, with more love than I've known how to show. Mother. Isabella sat down hard on one of the kitchen chairs, the album clutched to her chest, tears streaming freely now. Daniel moved to her side, one hand gentle on her shoulder, not offering platitudes or false comfort, just steady presence. She sees me, Isabella managed between sobs. She actually sees me. She always saw you, Daniel said quietly. She just didn't know how to choose you over the life she'd built. But maybe she's learning. Maybe you both are. Emma appeared in the doorway, her expression worried. Isabella? Are you sad? Do you need a hug? Hugs help with sad. Dad says so. Isabella opened her arms and Emma came running, wrapping herself around Isabella with fierce protectiveness, and Daniel joined them, his arms encompassing them both. And for a moment they were just 3 people holding on to each other, while emotions too big for words found their way out through tears and touch, and the simple gift of being witnessed in pain. When Isabella finally pulled herself together, her face blotchy and her composure shattered, but her heart feeling lighter than it had in months, Emma announced that crying meant they definitely needed cookies, and possibly hot chocolate, and she was prepared to make both if the adults would stop being sad and help her reach the high cabinet. The rest of Christmas passed in a blur of cookies and card games and Emma's elaborate storytelling, and when Emma finally fell asleep that night, exhausted from joy and sugar, Daniel and Isabella found themselves on the front porch, wrapped in blankets against the December cold, watching the neighborhood lights twinkle in the darkness. Thank you, Isabella said, for letting me be here. for witnessing all of that mess, for not making me feel like I had to hold it together. You don't have to hold it together around us, Daniel said. That's kind of the point of people who care about you. They're there for the falling apart too. I'm not used to falling apart in front of people. I know, but maybe it's time to get used to it. To trust that vulnerability doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Isabella turned to look at him, really look at him in the soft glow of the porch light. This man who'd somehow become essential to her in the space of a few months. When I said those words to you at the gala, "Tonight I'll make you mine," I meant them. But I meant them wrong. I thought wanting you meant possessing you, adding you to my life like another acquisition. I didn't understand then that real love isn't about possession. "What's it about?" Daniel asked, his voice careful. "It's about choosing each other. Day after day, decision after decision. It's about building something together instead of trying to own something separately." She reached for his hand, laced their fingers together. "I'm in love with you, Daniel. Not the desperate infatuation I felt that night at the gala, but something real and complicated and terrifying. And I know the timing is terrible and the logistics are impossible, and you have every reason to protect yourself and Emma from my mess, but I needed to tell you the truth." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I've been in love with you since the day you walked into that cafe and apologized for the wrong things," he finally said. "You apologized for saying something true instead of apologizing for all the ways you'd let other people script your life. And I thought, this woman is going to break my heart or save it, and either way, I'm already too far gone to protect myself." "I don't want to break your heart," Isabella whispered. "I don't think you could if you tried. Not anymore. Because I see you now, really see you, and I know that your heart is too good to break someone else's on purpose." He turned to face her fully. "But I need you to understand something about loving me. Emma comes first. Always, every decision I make, every choice about my future, it all runs through the filter of what's best for her. That's not negotiable." "I wouldn't want it to be," Isabella said firmly. "Emma should come first. She deserves a father who puts her needs ahead of everything else. And honestly, the way you love her is part of why I love you. You showed me what it looks like to choose something real over everything else." "Then we need to talk about logistics," Daniel said, always practical even in moments of emotional confession. "You're in Portland building a career. I'm here building stability for Emma. Neither of us can just uproot our lives without serious consequences. So what does this actually look like?" Isabella had thought about this, had turned it over in her mind during sleepless nights in Portland, during phone calls that stretched too late and mornings when she woke reaching for something that wasn't there. "I think it looks like patience," she said slowly, "like building trust through consistency even when distance makes it hard, like video calls and visits when we can manage them and honest conversations about whether this is sustainable long term." She paused, gathering courage. "And maybe eventually, if this keeps growing the way I think it will, it looks like one of us being willing to relocate. Not now, not until we're both sure, but someday." "You just started building your life in Portland," Daniel pointed out. "Your career, your independence, your proof that you can make it on your own. I can't ask you to give that up." "You're not asking. I'm offering it as a possibility. Not now, not rushed, but as something to work toward if we both decide that's what we want." Isabella squeezed his hand. "Daniel, I left my family's empire because I needed to prove I could build something of my own. And I have. Margaret Morrison trusts me with real responsibility. Clients request me specifically. I'm making a name for myself that has nothing to do with the Grant legacy. I've proven what I needed to prove." "Proven it to who?" "To myself," Isabella said. "And that was the whole point, not to run forever, but to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. Once you know you can do that, where you stand becomes a choice instead of a necessity." "And you'd choose here? Choose us?" "Eventually, if we get there, yes. But Daniel, I'm not saying this to pressure you or to rush anything. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I'm thinking long term. That this isn't just about right now, or even the next few months. I'm building towards something, and what I want to build includes you and Emma." Daniel pulled her closer, tucked her against his side, and they sat in the cold darkness while the world settled around them into something that felt like hope. "We'll take it slow," he he said finally. We'll do visits when we can, video calls in between, and we'll be honest about when it's working and when it's hard. And if we get to a point where the distance is hurting more than helping, we'll figure out the next step together. Does that work? It works, Isabella agreed. They sat together until the cold drove them inside, where Daniel checked on Emma one more time and Isabella gathered her blankets from the couch. And when Daniel kissed her goodnight, it was gentle and certain and felt like a promise neither of them needed to speak aloud. The next 3 days passed in a comfortable rhythm. Emma's delight at having Isabella there to witness her elaborate games and stories. Daniel's quiet competence in managing the household while making space for Isabella to be part of it. Moments of intimacy stolen between the demands of parenting and the awareness that their time together was limited. On Isabella's last night, Emma asked if they could have a fancy dinner, which in her interpretation meant using the good plates and putting a tablecloth on the table, and everyone had to dress up. So Daniel wore a tie that Emma picked out, Isabella wore the nicest dress she'd brought, and Emma put on her princess dress, which was technically a Halloween costume, but she loved it too much to relegate it to once a year. We look very sophisticated, Emma announced, surveying their table with satisfaction, just like in the movies. We look perfect, Isabella agreed, and meant it. Not perfect in the polished way of her former life, but perfect in its genuine joy, in its celebration of the ordinary made special through intention. After dinner, after Emma had been coaxed into bed with promises that Isabella would visit again soon, Daniel and Isabella had their last conversation before her early morning flight. I'm going to miss you, Daniel said simply. The house feels different with you in it. Better. More complete. I'm going to miss you too, both of you. Isabella curled into his side on the couch, trying to memorize the feeling of being close to him, a physical presence instead of phone intimacy. But I think we can do this. I think we can make this work. I think so too. But Isabella, promise me something. What? Promise me you won't sacrifice your career or your independence to make this easier. Promise me you'll keep building your life in Portland until you're absolutely certain that relocating is what you want, not just what you think I need. I promise, Isabella said. If you promise to tell me if Emma's struggling with this, if having me in your lives is confusing or hard for her. She adores you, Daniel said with a slight smile. But I promise to pay attention and be honest if anything changes. They fell asleep on the couch together, wrapped in blankets and each other. And when Isabella's alarm went off at 4 a.m. for her flight, Daniel drove her to the airport in the pre-dawn darkness while Emma slept peacefully in her room. Thank you for coming, Daniel said at the departure gate, holding both her hands. Thank you for being brave enough to let us in. Thank you for being patient enough to wait while I figured out how, Isabella replied, and kissed him with all the certainty she'd been afraid to feel for months. The flight back to Portland felt different than the flight there, not heavy with anticipation, but light with possibility, with the knowledge that she was returning to her life instead of running from something else. She'd spent Christmas with people who loved her not for what she could provide or what family she represented, but for who she actually was. She'd told Daniel she loved him, and he'd said it back. She'd opened presents with Emma and cried over her mother's gift, and felt part of something real for the first time in her adult life. The new year arrived with Isabella back at Morrison & Associates, throwing herself into the expanded Riverside project with renewed energy. The clients, the retired couple converting the historic properties into a bed and breakfast, had become genuinely invested in Isabella's input, treating her like a partner in their dream rather than just a hired professional. You understand what we're trying to build here, Mrs. Chen said during a site visit in early January. Not just a business, but a place where people feel welcomed and seen, where the architecture serves the experience instead of overwhelming it. That's exactly what good design should do, Isabella agreed, sketching quick modifications to address the couple's latest concerns. Support the life you want to live instead of dictating it. The words resonated beyond the project, reflecting back everything Isabella had learned over the past 6 months. Architecture was about creating space for life to happen, and her own life was finally being built on foundations she'd chosen instead of ones she'd inherited. Margaret Morrison noticed the shift, called Isabella into her office in late January. You're different, Margaret observed. More settled, less like you're constantly bracing for someone to discover you're not supposed to be here. I spent Christmas with someone who reminds me that I belong wherever I choose to build something meaningful, Isabella said. It's helping me believe it. Good, because I'm putting you forward for the community center project. It's high visibility, substantial budget, and it'll establish you as a serious architect in the Pacific Northwest market. You ready for that? Isabella thought about the question, really thought about it, instead of immediately doubting herself or looking for ways she might fail. Yes, she said. I'm ready. Distance with Daniel was hard but manageable. They talked every night when Emma was asleep. Video calls that ranged from serious discussions about their future to silly conversations about nothing in particular. Emma joined the calls twice a week, showing Isabella her latest drawings or reading portions of her current book or just chattering about her day with the unselfconscious ease of a child who decided Isabella belonged in her life. Valentine's Day arrived with a package from Daniel. Not flowers or jewelry, but a framed photo from Christmas morning, all three of them on the couch, Emma between them, everyone laughing at something outside the frame. On the back, Daniel had written, "Building something real, one day at a time." Isabella hung it on her apartment wall, this evidence of her chosen family, and took a photo to send back to him with the caption, "Best thing I ever built." In March, her mother called. Not a text, not a letter, but an actual phone call that made Isabella's heart race when she saw Catherine Grant's name on her screen. "Mom?" she answered, uncertain. "Isabella, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "No, it's fine. I'm just surprised. We usually communicate by letter." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Your father and I are separating. I wanted you to hear it from me before it becomes public knowledge." The news hit like a physical blow. "What? Mom? What happened?" "Nothing dramatic, nothing scandalous, just 30 years of realizing I've been performing a role instead of living a life, and watching you have the courage to walk away made me examine why I was staying." Catherine's voice was steady, but carried an edge of exhaustion. "I'm not leaving him for another man or because of some great betrayal. I'm leaving because I want to find out who I am when I'm not Catherine Grant, perfect society wife. I'm 53 years old, and I don't know what I actually like or want or believe in. That's unacceptable." "Mom, I'm so proud of you," Isabella said, tears streaming down her face. "I know how hard that must have been." "You made it look possible," Catherine said softly. "You walked away from everything, and somehow you're not just surviving, you're thriving. Your letters about your work, about your life in Portland, about that man and his daughter, you sound happy, Isabella. Really happy, and I realized I've never felt that, not once in my entire adult life." They talked for 2 hours, Catherine sharing plans to move to a smaller apartment in the city, to take art classes she'd always been interested in but never had time for, to travel to places she wanted to see rather than places that served her husband's business interests. And Isabella shared honestly about her life, about Margaret Morrison's mentorship, about the community center project, about Daniel and Emma, and the way love looked different when it was chosen instead of arranged. "Bring him to visit," Catherine said before they hung up. "Both of them. I want to meet the people who helped my daughter remember who she was supposed to be." In April, Daniel and Emma flew to Portland for Emma's spring break. Isabella showed them her city, the food carts and Powell's books, and the Japanese garden where Emma was convinced she saw actual magic in the way the light filtered through the trees. She introduced them to her coworkers at a casual office gathering, and Margaret Morrison pulled Daniel aside at one point. "You're good for her," Margaret said bluntly. "She was talented when she started here, but she was also terrified. Now she's talented and confident. That's your influence." "I think that's her own growth," Daniel replied. "I just reminded her she was capable of it." "That's what good partners do," Margaret said. "They remind us of our own strength when we forget." That week felt like a glimpse of what their future could look like. Emma loved Portland's quirky personality. Daniel fit seamlessly into Isabella's life there. And for the first time, Isabella could envision a version of her world that included both of them permanently. The night before they left, after Emma was asleep in Isabella's bed while the adults took the couch, Daniel brought up the question that had been circling unspoken between them. "I got a job offer," he said. "Small family law firm here in Portland, Margaret Morrison's husband knows the senior partner made a recommendation. It's not as prestigious as what I had before, but it's good work and the pay is competitive. Isabella's heart started racing. You're considering it? Moving here? I'm considering it, Daniel confirmed. But only if it's what you want. Only if having us here full-time is something you're ready for, not something you feel obligated to accept because we've been doing long distance. Emma, Isabella said immediately. What about Emma? Moving her away from her school, her friends, everything familiar. I talked to her about it. Hypothetically, just exploring the idea. She said, and I quote, Dad, Isabella's in Portland. That's where we should be. Daniel smiled at the memory. Kids are resilient. She'd make new friends. And honestly, starting fresh somewhere without the memories of Sarah everywhere might be good for both of us. Isabella processed this carefully, looking for the catch, the reason to say no, the way this could go wrong. But all she could find was hope and possibility, and the reality that what they'd been building across distance could become something built in proximity. I want you here, she said finally, both of you. Not because I feel obligated, but because I've been doing the math in my head for months trying to figure out how to make this work long term, and having you here solves every equation. You're sure? Daniel searched her face. Because this is a big step. This is me and Emma becoming part of your everyday life, not just your phone calls and occasional visits. This is dinner negotiations and homework help, and the reality of a 7-year-old's energy at 7 in the morning. I'm sure, Isabella said, and pulled him into a kiss that felt like sealing a promise they'd been making in increments for months. Daniel took the job. Emma finished her school year with a combination of excitement about the move and sadness about leaving her friends, and Daniel sold his house with surprising speed to a young family who loved its modest charm. In July, they moved to Portland. Daniel and Emma into a rental house 3 blocks from Isabella's apartment, close enough to build their relationship, but far enough to give everyone breathing room while they figured out the logistics of their merged lives. The first month was an adjustment. Emma struggling with being the new kid, Daniel navigating an unfamiliar legal environment, Isabella learning to balance her relationship with her career responsibilities. They had arguments about scheduling and miscommunications about expectations and moments when the reality of daily life felt overwhelming compared to the romance of long distance. But they also had Sunday morning breakfasts at the food carts, Emma's delighted discovery of a park with the best swings in the universe, movie nights on Isabella's too small couch, and the slow building of routines that felt like family. In September, Catherine Grant visited Portland. She met Daniel and Emma over dinner at a restaurant that Emma insisted on because it had the best macaroni and cheese, and Catherine charmed them both with stories about Isabella's childhood that made her daughter blush. You've done well for yourself, Catherine told Daniel when Isabella took Emma to the bathroom. Not just professionally, but in building a life that actually matters. My daughter is lucky to have you. I think I'm the lucky one, Daniel replied. Your daughter is extraordinary. She always was, Catherine said softly. I just forgot to tell her often enough. A year after the gala where Isabella had whispered those 4 words that changed everything, she stood in Daniel's backyard watching Emma chase fireflies in the summer dusk, Daniel beside her with his arm around her waist. You know what I've been thinking about? Isabella said quietly. What? That night at the gala, when I said, tonight I'll make you mine. I was so wrong about what that meant. How so? I thought making you mine meant possession, meant adding you to my life like acquiring something valuable. But real love isn't about making someone yours. It's about choosing each other, day after day, in all the ordinary moments that don't look like acquisition at all. Daniel pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her temple. You want to know what I thought when you said those words? What? I thought this woman is either going to destroy me or save me, and either way my life just got interesting. He smiled at the memory. Turns out you did both. Destroyed the version of me that was just going through motions, saved the version that remembered how to hope for something more than survival. Emma came running over, her hands cupped carefully around something. Look! I caught one! Isabella, Dad, look how pretty! They looked at the firefly pulsing light against Emma's palms, at her face illuminated by wonder and the gathering darkness, and Isabella thought about all the ways life surprised you when you stopped trying to control it. She'd walked away from an empire to find herself, found herself by letting other people see her clearly, let people in by risking vulnerability instead of performing perfection. And somewhere in all that walking away and finding and risking, she'd built something better than anything she'd inherited, a life that was messy and real and hers. "Make a wish and let it go," Daniel told Emma gently. Emma closed her eyes, whispered something too quiet to hear, and opened her hands. The firefly hesitated for a moment, then lifted into the darkening sky, its light joining the stars beginning to emerge overhead. "What did you wish for?" Isabella asked. Emma grinned up at her. "Can't tell, or it won't come true. But it's a good one." She ran off again, chasing more magic in the summer darkness, and Isabella leaned into Daniel's embrace, watching this child who'd somehow become hers, not through biology but through choice, through showing up, through loving her father enough to love everything that came with him. "I love you," Daniel said quietly, not for the first time, but with the same certainty he'd carried since the beginning. "I love you too," Isabella replied. "Both of you. This whole messy, beautiful, real life we're building. No regrets? About everything you walked away from?" Isabella considered the question seriously, looking back at the woman who'd whispered desperate confessions in the shadows of a charity gala, who'd broken an engagement that would have secured her future, who'd chosen uncertainty over safety because safety had been killing her slowly. "Not one," she said finally. "I thought I was walking away from everything. Turns out I was walking toward this, toward you and Emma and work that matters, and a life I actually want to live. That's not loss. That's the best trade I ever made." They stood together in the gathering darkness, the sound of Emma's laughter mixing with the summer night sounds, the smell of roses from the neighbor's garden, the simple, profound reality of choosing each other not just once, but continuously, in all the ordinary moments that built a life. Isabella had learned that love wasn't about possession or control or making someone yours through force of will or wealth or power. Love was about showing up honestly, about being seen clearly, about building something together that neither person could build alone. It was about choosing someone and being chosen in return, not because you had to, but because the alternative, a life without each other, was unthinkable. It was about understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was walk away from everything you knew to find out who you were meant to be. And sometimes the bravest thing was letting someone walk beside you once you figured it out. In the darkness, Emma's voice called out, "Isabella! Dad! Come catch fireflies with me. There's so many and I need help." They went to join her, leaving behind the porch light and the adult conversation and all the complicated history that had brought them to this moment. They chased light in the darkness with a 7-year-old who believed in magic and wishes and the simple truth that good things happened when people chose each other. And Isabella thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that Emma was absolutely right.